welcome to Sensemaking Community History. We are gathered here today to kick off an exciting new documentary project. Our goal is to capture the stories that built the field of information architecture through live conversations with people who were directly involved in the evolution of the practice. And today we are starting at the beginning.
So this is the first of 6 panel interviews. We'll be live streaming once a month for the rest of 2026. Each session will be released as an individual video, and ultimately we're working towards making a movie to preserve the oral history of the movement and this community, which we're aiming to screen at the IA conference in 2027.
I'll be your host, Cass Fellerman. I'm a lifelong word nerd and a sensemaker in residence with the Sensemakers Club. Background-wise, I studied journalism in college, and I started my career as a copywriter before shifting to UX and UI writing in the consumer tech product space, which is where I really discovered the magic of IA. And that led me to content design, content strategy, and now today I'm a principal strategist and I work on design, operations, and communications. Because to me, at the end of the day, all jobs boil down to talking to people, which is what we're here to do.
And I'm your host, David Farkas, a UX generalist turned researcher and secret IA. I find complex workflows and sticky enterprise domains a delightful challenge, and I'm occasionally known for giving my teams pens that read quite literally, "I have receipts," as researchers are the ones who bring the data. Today, we're meeting with Lou Rosenfeld, Peter Morville, and Samantha Bailey, the founders of Argus Associates, one of the original information architecture practices in the industry. I've had the privilege of knowing Lou and Peter for pretty much since my induction into the UX community, and I've crossed paths with Samantha, though we don't go quite as far back. And Cass, I believe this is your first time meeting our guests.
Yes, live in real time. We have barely spoken before everyone's seeing this live. So yeah, by way of getting started, we'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves separately. Lou, would you like to go first? We would like to know who you are, what you do, and how you started practicing IA.
Oh gosh, I'm Lou Rosenfeld. I'm the founder of Rosenfeld Media and founded Argus Associates with Joe Janes a million years ago. I'm sort of a librarian. I don't think the librarians ever totally saw me as one of their own because I was very interested in technology from the very get-go when I was in library school. And I got to live in a really lucky time, a really fortunate time, where things were kind of on the march upward when it came to the intersection of information and technology and networking. So was at Argus with Peter and Samantha, and we grew that and did that for many years. And then I was an independent information architect for a number of years. And then I started Rosenfeld Media to publish UX books and produce UX conferences. And here we are.
Thank you. Samantha, would you like to go next?
Well, I really feel like Peter should go next because I don't come on the scene until after Peter arrives.
Awesome.
All right, you've already started passing the baton here. So I'm Peter Morville. I am retired from a career in information architecture and currently run an animal sanctuary with chickens, goats, barn cats, donkeys, and llamas. And you know, my sort of origin story in terms of getting into information architecture goes back to about 1991, maybe 1992. I had graduated from college, had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, was living with my parents, was miserable, and I was searching for a career in by wandering through libraries looking at professional books. And one afternoon I stumbled upon this tattered old book that was called, the title was Careers in Library Science. And I knew nothing about library science. I'd never thought about a career in a library. But as I read that book, I made a connection to what had become my pastime back then, which was surfing and exploring the early computer bulletin board systems, America Online, CompuServe, Prodigy. Only old people will know what I'm talking about. This is
Archie and Veronica.
This is before even the internet was public. and I made a strange connection, which was that there was some value of bringing what had been traditional librarianship, kind of organizing print materials. There was some value in bringing that to these emerging digital networks, and that was what took me to library school, where I met Lou and got into the internet and then information architecture.
Peter, you can't ever retire from information architecture.
Well, I'm retired from my career in information architecture. I don't make money anymore. I still write about it.
And
Now you're just a hobbyist, an enthusiast.
I made my way into IA through a series of false starts. I thought that I wanted to go into public health, and I moved to Michigan to get residency there so that I could afford to do a graduate degree at the University of Michigan. And while I was doing that, I worked at Planned Parenthood in preparation for my master's degree in public health, and rapidly discovered that I was not cut out to be part of the culture wars and really needed to find a job where I could just write Planned Parenthood checks. Interestingly, Lou Rosenfeld was a volunteer at Planned Parenthood because we crossed a picket line to go to work while I worked there. So I knew who Lou was because there were girls in the front office that had crushes on him.
Were?
Totally.
I didn't know.
This is pre-MJ. So
This is amazing detail. Thank you. The Planned Parenthood connection.
right, I wasn't gonna go to get a degree in public health, and I was like, what do I do? And my dad's best friend is a molecular biologist, and he said, information is going to explode, go to library school. And I am very embarrassed to admit I did no research whatsoever. I just took the advice of the smartest guy I knew and applied to library school and went to the University of Michigan at a time where the school was in such crisis and disarray that to this day I don't really know exactly what education I got. But Joe Janes was there. And Joe Janes introduced me to the internet and the Internet Public Library, where I built out the young adult section of the Internet Public Library in grad school, and marched off and got a job as a reference librarian, wanting to move into YA, and was all excited, and failed hugely within 3 months, and was like, oh my God, I've got a master's degree and I can't be a librarian. What do I do? And I checked my email, and there was a job posting for an information architect / project manager. And it was like a posting that had been written for the dream job I didn't know that I wanted. Every single thing was either, oh, I can do that, or I don't know what that is, but it sounds like I'd like it. So I was so excited applying for the job at Argus, partly because it was going to rescue me from West Bloomfield Township Public Library, but more because it was like my dream job has been defined for me, and indeed that was absolutely true. Argus was my dream job.
How did that email land in your inbox?
Through we all went to the University of Michigan School of Information.
Okay, so that's where it all started.
And so Smith, I'm going to ask you to pull that job description up, because I think you mentioned as we were in the green room that you have that book. While you pull that up, I'm curious for Lou and Peter, tell us a little bit more about, the early 90s, world of information architecture, world of technology. Who else was working in this space, and what was sort of the impetus that you got together for? What was the gap that led to Argus?
Well, Argus started oddly as a training company. It was actually Joe Janes, who we mentioned, was on the faculty at the University of Michigan High School, and we were all friends. And Joe and I saw an opportunity to teach teachers and librarians and ultimately others how to use this thing called the internet. So we were doing classes in the early 90s on like what is email and what is this thing called Waze, which was a internet search tool, and what does FTP do? And it was a lot of fun. And Peter, I think you were we brought you in, and you were one of the early instructors.
Yeah, yeah. And really for the first year that we were working together, our income was mostly from internet training, teaching people to use Telnet and FTP and Archie and Veronica and Waze, tools for navigating and using the internet way back before Google, before even Alta Vista. So yeah, we would teach classes once a month, and then Lou managed to get us some projects where we were designing the first Gopher sites for clients, purely text-based hierarchical systems. We were really, I was working 30 hours a week for Argus and doing some work for the University of Michigan at the same time. But we were really just making enough money every month to pay my salary. Like it was a tough year. Lou was still in the doctoral program, and Joe was a faculty member at the university, and so I was really out there on my own. I basically had a headache for the entire first year of Argus, just from stress.
It's interesting too because so I just got to make the point about Gopher. Well, first of all, Gopher was created at the University of Minnesota, and where Samantha, not far from where she is living right now. And it was a hierarchy. Think of the web, but instead of hypertext, it was all hierarchies. And, it was like, oh, okay, you could actually have a menu where each option could lead to another menu, which might be on another server somewhere, or a text file, which could be on your server or another server. Ooh, networked information. This is really cool. And around that time, I was teaching with Joe course, like a sort of independent study, and I think that's how we maybe crossed paths, Peter, on how to use the internet at the information school at Michigan. And that morphed into teaching an actual class. And in that class, I was teaching people how to use the internet as librarians would to identify and pull together information. And the keystone project at the end of each year was create a guide to the internet's resources on topic X, personal finance, or theater resources, or what have you. And we were doing that in Gopher and publishing it in Gopher, and it was really amazing for our students. They were so excited because they were actually using their skills, but they had users. They actually had an audience that was right away using their products and like the internet was growing quickly, so more and more people. And I remember at the end of the first year, a friend of mine from Michigan State University, Rich Wiggins, said, I had him guest lecture to the class, and he said, you're all using Gopher right now, but in a few months, you're all going to be using the web. And I said, fiddlesticks, Rich. No one would use hypertext. It's just too personalized. It doesn't generalize in ways that people understand, and menus are much better. Hierarchy is much better. Anyway, like he said, 3 months later, NCSA Mosaic launched first graphic browser for the web. The web had been around in VT100 mode, and suddenly our brains exploded. I can tell you right now, I remember seeing that browser for the first time, a graphical version of the web, and it was like that moment in what's the movie Follow Yellow Brick Road?
Wizard of Oz?
Wizard of Oz, where it goes from black and white. Thank you, black and white to color, because we didn't see pictures on the web, and then suddenly we opened this browser window for the first time, and you could load a trove of Kandinsky paintings. which are so colorful, and everyone just was crazed by it. And so we all rushed to the web, like instantly. And for the first year or two, the big debate was, is the web going to be used for commercial purposes? Because it was not coming from the commercial world at all. And we debated it as if we had any say.
I have to correct the record, Lou. We met a little bit earlier than when you taught that class, because as soon as I got to the university, the School of Information and Library Studies, I did a project to assess the information needs of faculty and staff at the school. And so I was interviewing faculty, staff, administration, and I interviewed Lou. And at that time, he was in this little dark office. It was almost like Harry Potter's closet under the staircase. And I had been told, he's the internet guy. You need to talk to him. And so I go in there, and I've got my old-fashioned tape recorder, and I interviewed him. And I remember going back to my home later that day and listening, playing back the tape. And there's one moment there where Lou just started, complaining about all the students at the school and how they weren't interested in the internet, and they just wanted to be traditional librarians, and they didn't see the potential. And this kind of made me mad, because I was a student who was interested in the internet, and at that time there were no courses, kind of focused on the internet. And so I went back to Lou and I said, "Hey, you're complaining about this. Like, I'm a student, I'm interested. What can I do?" And at that point, Lou said, "Well, the best way to learn is to teach. So help me teach this technology class about the internet." And so that was actually how we crossed paths.
That's right.
And just to clarify our timeline here, we're 1990, 91, is that around where we're at?
92 was when we met, yeah.
Okay. And then, Samantha, you said the job posting was from 1996?
96, yes. So we did not overlap at the School of Information at all. I was there from, I did my degree 94 to 96, and I did my stint in the real world library from the time I graduated until I got the offer from Argus, which happened in September, and I started in October. So I'm coming up on 30 years for my information architecture career.
Very impressive tenure. So what was going on with Argus at the time? They were growing. What required this dream role for you, and what drew you to that? You kind of talked about it.
Well, they had gotten the contract to write the book, and they were very straightforward about that. Of like, we have this contract to write this book, and we need to be able to focus on it. And so we need somebody who can take some of the workload on while we focus on the book.
I don't want to assume any of the listeners might be aware of this. We're talking about the Polar Bear book, the infamous Polar Bear book.
We are.
Right. Okay. So just for folks who might not be aware, this is O'Reilly book, affectionately known as the Polar Bear book, and it's the Information Architecture Codex, probably what many of us would consider the Bible of IA in the field.
Okay, and it came out of Argus.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your story there, Samantha.
I'm going to read you the first line of the position description, because this kind of explains it all. We are seeking a creative, team-oriented, entrepreneurial individual with a background in information and library science. As an information architecture consultant, this individual must understand the principles of information organization and indexing, information management, and user interface design. Experience developing complex, distributed, internet-based information systems is desired.
Wow.
There was my dream job in a nutshell.
And you started 1 month later.
I feel like we can lift that job description for today with everything happening in AI, and it would still apply. So this is the heyday of IAs. Let's take our mantle. So who else? We're in the 1996 area now. Who else was doing this in the field, and what really set Argus apart from the Polar Bear book?
So, it's interesting. There really weren't. So there was like let me put it to you this way. Richard Saul Wurman is the person who's generally credited with coming up with the term information architecture. And we knew that there was this world out there that he was a part of. We had no idea how big it was or how influential it was, but man, they had some really beautiful books. In fact, one of them was on the coffee table in our office, Information Architects. And, those books delivered really great ideas about information architecture that seemed most appropriate, at least to my knowledge, my understanding, for two-dimensional spaces, for paper, for screens, but not for the multi-dimensional spaces that the web was essentially foisting upon the planet, or about to. And I think we felt very much like there needs to be another take at information architecture. It needs to borrow from what we know in library and information science about the engineering of semantics, basically, and bring that to the mix, because that's going to be really important in these big, ill-defined information spaces that bleed into each other and aren't discrete two-dimensional packages like we thought the Wurman School of IA is about. And I don't want to throw shade on it, because there's so much to it, and I think, certainly speaking for myself, my knowledge of that form of IA was pretty limited back then. But we didn't know anyone else who was going at it the way we were going at it. We didn't, for anyone to come out of library science to be entrepreneurial was already kind of a weird path to take. So we also did not just invent ourselves as an information architecture company so much, because early on you couldn't get work doing that. They just heard of the web. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of put together a consortium of, I think it was 3 or 4 other companies in Ann Arbor, many of us in the same building, where we pooled our different complementary skills to build websites, like soup to nuts websites, the technology, the branding, the language, and the IA. And some of our earliest clients were, AT&T, I think, was the big one when Samantha started. Peter and I had an adventure with Borders Books and Music, if you remember them. In fact, I like to say that Jeff Bezos is all my fault, because we had the initial gig with Borders to both build their website and to build the first bookstore on the web. And this is before anyone had really heard of Amazon. And we spec'd it out, and the politics there were so bad we had to quit the gig.
But I will tell you that one of the first things when I started, I got to see the work that was done for Borders, and it was far superior to the initial Amazon. So had Borders run with what they were gifted, could have been a whole different ballgame.
Consulting is like love. The first relationship is the most passionate one, and it's the one that ends too soon, and you never really get over it. I think Borders was that for us. But Samantha, our version of Amazon was better in every way except the fact that it didn't launch.
Yeah, and speaking of which, I have a couple different points I wanted to add to the story. One was, I believe that we came upon the architect metaphor independently of Mr. Wurman. Really, it was nothing fancy. We just the way that we would sort of explain to clients what we did, because it was hard. Nobody understood what we were talking about, and we ended up saying that they already knew that they needed a designer, and they already knew they needed a developer, someone to do the coding, but they really needed a third leg to the stool, and that was an architect. Right, someone to come up with the blueprints for the website, and Lou started writing a column called Web Architect, probably around 95 or 6.
Or maybe.
And so we were, we'd sort of embraced the architecture metaphor even before we really knew much about Werman and his sort of school of thought. The other point I wanted to make is that it was a very exciting time, right, to be part of the internet. And, right, we were, just started the company and we're meeting with the CEO of Borders, right? And we
were kids.
Yeah,
we were little kids.
We barely knew what we were doing, and we're meeting with the CEO of Borders. And we also had another venture that Lou had started while he was at the University of Michigan, and we spun this off for Argus. It became known as the Argus Clearinghouse. And it was this collection of subject-oriented internet resource guides that helped people find information on the internet on particular topics before there were good search engines, right? So for a while, it was one of the best ways to find information on the entire internet. And we ran that. We started to experiment with advertising. And at one point, we decided we needed some advice. And we managed to get on the phone with Michael Porter, right? Like the guru of business strategy, to talk about our business strategy, which was amazing, right? Like, and again, these young folks starting out talking with one of the most famous and distinguished business school professors that's ever lived. And so it was a special time where you could get access to people because you were doing something at the forefront of what everyone was talking about at that time.
Maybe to just put a quick bow on it, Dave, about those times in 95, when we were doing these sort of collaborative projects with developers, and we had our consortium company, and it was really stressful. And I remember Peter and I talking about this and saying, you know what, it's really hard right now, but by 1997, we're going to be able to do just IA and say goodbye to all this other stuff. And by 1997, that's what we did.
True.
It matured that quickly that we could just focus on IA. And not surprisingly, we were able to raise our rates substantially, like double every year practically for a while. And I remember just learning a lot about not only business but psychology, because the higher our prices were, the better people treated us. Kind of interesting that way. But we felt very strongly that IA was not something that a contractor would do, but it was something a consultant would do and should be paid accordingly.
We also learned that it was often better to have less detail in our proposal than more detail. Less detail at a higher rate gets accepted faster than more detail at a lower rate.
I feel there are agencies today that still need that lesson.
It's funny, we just hosted in the Rosenverse yesterday, Joe Elmendorf, who's part of the Sensemakers Club, as you all know, and he gave a talk called Shitty Maps.
Yep.
And that's what it's about. Stop overdoing it with your deliverables. And Werman Architecture, man, that book was very overdone, those deliverables. It was like a Frank Lloyd Wright house. You could not change a thing.
Right.
I'm a little curious, Lou. You mentioned, 97 setting the time where we are, double downing all IA, moving away from the other stuff. And then very shortly after that, there's what some of us remember as the dot-com boom and subsequent bust. And the internet's tied to that. So talk us through, Argus's experience through that bubble and the subsequent reset in the industry.
Well, I like to look at our history in those years through the lens of the buildings we were in. So we started off in a space that could hold, we squeezed 8 people in, and then we moved. All right, we need room for 20. And we filled that up, and then we're like, I got to move again. And we're up to like 40 people toward the end of 2000, which was our peak, and we were building out space next door for an 80-person company in Ann Arbor, Michigan, by the way. And we were drawing talent from Australia, Sweden, and all parts of the world to be in little Ann Arbor, Michigan. And there was just a lot of, as Peter described it a moment ago, it was an optimistic time that went to a silly time very quickly. That was the era of sock puppet ads on at the Super Bowl and whatnot. A lot of stupid money, and probably like right now, the stupid money eventually runs out, and the smart people run and leave the rest of us holding the bag. So in October of 2000, we were at our peak. We had just held the very first conference that Peter produced, the Information Architecture Conference in La Jolla. It was a great success. Things were wonderful. We had so much work. It was a great time. But information architecture, probably even today, but certainly back then, was one of those canary in the coal mine types of species. So things suddenly got bad. And all of a sudden, we lost our major clients. And they weren't .com clients. They were IBM, they were Morningstar, Nationwide Insurance, I believe, was another big one. They canceled the contracts. And it was just like the nuclear winter. And we had nothing come in for months. And then finally, in the new year, we started getting a few projects, but they were a tenth the size of the old projects. And that's when Peter and I knew we didn't want to keep at this. We rather than going bust, we decided to shut it down early. And that's what we did. So we went from October 2000 peak to April 2001, shut it down.
Yeah, we sort of skipped over a little bit in there before the .com bust, because 1998, February 1998 is when the first edition of the Polar Bear book came out. And right, we had been working incredibly hard on a big project for AT&T that was, an order of magnitude bigger than any project we'd ever done before. Samantha was working like literally 18-hour days to run that project. And we were writing the book, finishing the book. And then it was like the book came out and we finished the project, and it was like this sort of dead moment where we were like, well, what now? And we had money from the project, so we moved into new office space and stuff, but we weren't really sure what lay ahead. And it was towards the end of 1998 where the book sales started to absolutely take off. And we were certainly in the top 100 books on Amazon. I'm not sure if we ever hit the top 10, but it was selling like crazy. And right, it got named the best internet book of 1998 by Amazon.com. And that really started to create all sorts of opportunities, from speaking invitations, come give a keynote, to clients contacting us, and that's what sort of helped to drive that growth up to sort of 40 people in the next couple of years. Also, earlier in 2000, in the spring of 2000, Lou organized, in collaboration with the American Society for Information Science and Technology, like what was really the first major information architecture conference in the world, at the Boston Logan Hilton, right, airport hotel. And that was a very special moment where, like, what became known as the IA community, that was the first large-scale gathering, and it was a mix of academics and business folks, right? So it was about 50-50, people from universities and people who are consulting or working for businesses. And it was a really exciting experience to be there and to have these conversations about information architecture at the very beginning of Y2K.
Well, and I think the other thing is we had that special interest group email list, and so the community had been an online community, and it definitely felt like an online community, but it coalesced in a really different way when the people got together in the same room.
I'm sorry.
We're good.
Yeah, I just want to add something to what Peter was saying a moment ago about getting to 40 people. The book certainly helped, but I think actually the reason we were able to scale like double a year was because of Peter and Samantha and their ability to manage that growth and to manage the people. I'll take maybe 1% of the credit, but 99% to them. for being people who hadn't ever managed before and kind of figured it out. And you can talk to people, Samantha's not the only one for whom this was a dream job. I mean, 30 years later, there are still people who really miss working at Argus.
Yeah, that is true. Well, and I think the three of us, it was kind of a lucky accident, that it wound up being the three of us, because Lou was an incredible blue sky salesman who he called himself an information therapist at times, right? He would listen to somebody and he could really latch on to the pain point, and he could start riffing on ways to imagine solving the pain. And then Peter was the more pragmatic, like, somebody's going to have to do this work, so we can't sell them the moon. And I was good at the operational piece in terms of getting the people to, do the work and the coaching and kind of running it. So in those early years, I think the three of us were really complementary.
For sure. I want to throw a little anecdote out, actually, that I hadn't thought of for a while. When we used to have to bid on proposals, Peter and I had a ritual. We'd read the RFP together, and then he would go in his office and start doing all kinds of calculations on the whiteboard in his office. How many hours of this type of consultant, how many hours of that type of consultant. He'd come up with a number. I would go into my office and, I don't know, how to play solitaire or something, because I already knew what the number was. It was just like, I don't know, sounds right. And when he was ready, we'd basically compare numbers, and I swear to God, I don't think we were ever more than 10% apart. Yeah. Remember that, Peter?
Wow.
Yeah, I think that I guess to go back to just kind of what Samantha was saying, I feel like we were just this amazing team, right? I mean, first Lou and I working together, and we spent more time together than we spent with any other people in our lives for a few years there. And when Samantha came in, it really became this powerful team. I certainly never had a collaboration or team experience like that at any other time in my life, and so it was extremely intense. It wasn't always easy, but we absolutely had complementary strengths. And yeah, I was certainly at that time in my life, I was much more kind of the detail oriented, we need to do this in a rigorous manner, and Lou was more I'm just going to pull this out of the air, and magically we still ended up pretty close anyway.
That's amazing. The math was mathing. You were on the same wavelength.
It was also amazing how quickly things grew in terms of the nature of the projects we were taking on. Yeah. I will never forget that the very first expert evaluation that I ever wrote was for Henry Ford Health System, and they were paying us the massive sum of $8,000. And it was so much, and I was so stressed that I threw up over it. Did not realize that 2 years later, that would be laughable. And, we would be we don't get up for $8,000 projects.
Yeah, 2 years later, she's managing a $500,000 project.
Yeah, life comes at you fast. It was all happening at once. We have a few more questions we want to make sure we get to, respecting everybody's time. We've got one from an audience member. Hopefully they're in the audience. I can't tell, but it's also a future panelist. I hope I'm pronouncing their name right. Peter Boersma from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And Peter asks, was enterprise information architecture already a thing when you started practicing the user-centered version of IA? And if so, how did you define the differences and overlap?
No, I mean, just to give you the history there, I think enterprise. Wait, did you ask about enterprise IA or enterprise UX, Peter?
It was enterprise IA is how the question was submitted.
Got it. I don't know that we used that term. I think we
didn't.
We were certainly dealing with enterprises with IA challenges and seeing how so much of that comes down to organizational psychology and dynamics rather than metadata and search. I mean, so yeah. By the way, I think the person who coined the term information architecture is a guy named John Zachman. In 1976 or so, he used that as part of enterprise information architecture. So it's been a thing, Peter. It's been around, but that was much more of like a software systems architecture, more of a technical pursuit. As far as enterprise IA, from the kind of direction we all come from, I don't know really. I mean, when have we started hearing about enterprise IA much? Like, I remember I did my workshop on it, but I think that was many years later.
I feel like I'm putting it more around like 2003, 2004. Argus was past Argus and was at Wachovia, which was my, move into a corporate job after the 5 years of consulting.
Yeah, to me, the term enterprise information architecture is tied to a cartoon image of Lou blowing up silos.
Oh, I can find you that.
All right.
Yeah, I used that in my workshop on enterprise IA that I used to teach. That's how I made a living for a while.
So if anyone asks Lou for that illustration, Samantha, for that job description, we would love to get those as part of our oral and visual history and capture that as part of the record. We have 2 more questions in the remaining time we have, and wherever those take us. But one, I'm going to caveat, this is, might be if we pull anything out of our conversation today, this is likely to be pulled into that larger film. So no pressure on this being, made into a larger thing. But what's your most memorable information architecture community moment? It could be during your time at Argus, could be afterwards, but what stands out to you as this is the community? And Samantha, maybe we'll start with you first this time.
That's a good question. I think it was really that first ACIA conference, even though the SIG-IA conference happened before the ACIA conference. That conference in La Jolla was a point at which we had enough, we were learning as we were going, and as they were writing the Polar Bear book, they're literally incorporating, things that we're learning in projects into chapters in the book. And when the ACIA event happened, we had been teaching workshops. Peter and I had been doing user interface engineering workshops with Jared Spool's conference. We had a disastrous one in Boston where we could not get a connection with the audience and they were mean. And then we turned around and we did the same workshop in LA and we didn't change anything and they loved us. So I'm not sure what the lesson was from that one. But by the ACIA conference, we had enough experience under our belt that information architecture as a practice, a consulting practice, felt like something that we had defined and had enough expertise in to have earned opinions. And so the discussions at that conference, that was the start for me of those kind of discussions in my career being really exciting, and with folks who weren't Lou and Peter.
Branching out.
I'll go next.
Peter, what about you?
So one of the best things for me about having a career in information architecture and having been there at the start and doing the Polar Bear book was I got the opportunity over 25 years or so to give talks all over the world and meet people. And one of my favorite moments was in 2004, I was invited to give a couple of talks in Denmark. The first was at the Royal Danish School of Library Science in Copenhagen. But then I had been invited to speak at a retreat on the west coast of Denmark in a little town. So I get on a train and I go way out into the middle of nowhere, at least from my perspective. And I get off and it was like the place was small enough that there were only like 2 or 3 taxi cabs at the train station, and they all left with people, and I had to wait until the taxi cab came back. So I get in this cab, takes me off into the woods and like up a driveway, and I'm like thinking this person's gonna murder me. Like, it's getting dark. I'm just in the middle of nowhere. And we go to this little retreat center, right, really in the wilderness. And I didn't know anyone. I didn't know the language. I went to my room, and I was feeling kind of lonely, missing my family. And there was a reception organized for that evening. And so finally, I kind of dragged my introverted, kind of lonely self to the bar, got a beer, and sat down. And I'm just sort of sitting there. I don't know who's with the conference, who's just at this retreat center. And then this big, tall, like 6.5 foot, Danish guy comes up to my table, and he's kind of towering over me, and I'm just not quite sure what's going on. And he says, "Are you Peter Morville?" And I said, "Yeah." And he introduced himself. He said, "Can I sit down?" And I said, "Sure." And then he launched into telling me a story about how a few years before his mom was dying. He was in her room, basically sitting by her deathbed, and he had stumbled upon this polar bear book on information architecture. And at the time, he was unhappy with his career, and he was really sad about what was happening with his mom. And he starts reading this book while sitting by her deathbed. And he said, it gave me hope because I realized this is what I want to do with my career and my life. And it gave me kind of hope at one of my darkest times. And that was just a really touching, special moment of just the power of a book to kind of, help change people's lives.
Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that story.
At first I was worried that you weren't taking our time in Mexico, but that's a much better story, so I understand. Lou, what about yourself?
Well, I'm not going to do one, but I'll keep them each short. And just thinking of Peter's story, like it is like an amazing feeling to know that this kind of work does not only change the users' lives, but the people who do the work itself. And I do remember the first experience with that I had was I was in San Francisco like in '99 and visiting, I forget what company, or it was a studio, I forget, and someone introduces me to their people, and this woman just comes up and hugs me. Like, hi! You don't realize, you changed my life. Your book is, I'm really, like, to have a number of moments even nowadays where you hear that is just amazing. But, like, more communally oriented, I'll never forget the mailing list getting started, SIG-IA, as Samantha mentioned, and that feeling of not being alone. I'll never forget the first conference in Boston, as Peter mentioned, where it's like you're not alone, and you're not alone in person. And I mean, I think Peter mentioned loneliness, and I think a lot of people in this field, or at least people who were thinking along these lines, were really, really lonely. And they needed a word, or a term, a framework, a set of shared vocabulary terms to have conversations about information and the challenges that it wrought upon society. And I feel like we helped give them that. And I remember taking that feeling even further. I remember sitting with Christina Whitke at one of the early IA summits and saying, we need an association or some sort of community organization. And a year or so later, we had convened a bunch of folks at a Asilomar in California and decided to set up the Asilomar, the Asilomar Institute for Information Architecture, which eventually became the IA
Institute
Foundation, Peter? What was it?
IA Institute.
That's right. And then finally, I'll just say one more thing, like but to me, in a way, the most communal feeling I had that really meant the most was at Argus. And I'll never forget meeting Keith Instone.
Yeah.
And he was not a librarian. He was this weird thing called a usability engineer and came from computer science. We got to know him, and one time, I don't know, a year or two into, maybe a year after Samantha started, Peter and I said, we should hire this guy because he brings something different. And he did, not in terms of his skills to IA, but in terms of his personality and his perspective and outlook. And that was a really great thing. And we actually hired Carl Fast, because he
Because Samantha needed a husband.
And he brought a very different perspective that, like, I mistakenly associated with what we used to call back then markup languages, as a sort of a kind of technical approach. We brought in Amy Warner, who'd been a faculty member at the School of Information, who gave up tenure to come to Argus and be our staff metadata expert. And we had an indexer, Fred Leese, who also joined us. And we had Dennis Schleicher, who brought a background in anthropology. And we started mixing all these other things into the mix that maybe was primarily information and library studies. But to me, that's like the most exciting thing, is when you can not just get a new thing out there, but get different kinds of people to coalesce. And I'll never underestimate the value of a shared vocabulary to make that happen, and I think we helped do that with the book.
Yeah,
For sure.
I want to add one quick thing.
Thank you for-
one of the strangers who came up and hugged me out of the blue at a conference was the founder of the Sensemakers Club, Abby.
It's all one big family, it seems like. Speaking of continuing the legacy and everything, next month in this time slot, we're going to be talking with Jesse James Garrett, Christina Wadke, and Andrew Hinton about Asilomar and IA Institute formation. So is there anything that you would like us to ask them as part of the ongoing conversation?
Yeah, tell Jesse he still owes me for those martinis at Asilomar. I'm still waiting to be paid.
Got it. We can do that. We'll pass on the message. Anything else? No. All right. Well, yeah. Thank you for sharing these memories.
Sorry,
yeah.
I will add something, because I think one of the things that you guys had said you were going to ask about, maybe we're just low on time, but was sort of how the community's changed in recent years. The one thing I wanted to say is that, as I mentioned earlier, when we started with the first IA conference, or the IA summit, it was as it was known, it was a real mix of academics and business folks. And over the years, in the early years of that conference, there was a tremendous openness to philosophical topics, right? People were there not just, to get better at their job, but because they just had a deep intellectual interest in information architecture and all the surrounding topics. And in the later years that I was attending conferences, I saw that diminish, and an increased focus on, we just need to know practical stuff that we can go back and work on and apply on Monday morning. And I understand why that is, right? There's fear, out there in the sort of workplace, and people want to stay relevant, and there's a lot of change. But personally, I felt sad to see kind of a diminishing of just the intellectual spark and the interest in philosophical topics and just ideas. And I'm now working on a book called Natural Information Architecture, which is just my attempt to sort of reinvigorate that interest in information architecture outside the context of business and work.
That's amazing. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I don't know if your natural information architecture dealt with your animal husbandry and the shelter there, and the taxonomy of livestock or anything.
There are strange connections everywhere.
Well, and I have an undergraduate degree in philosophy, and I will say that Animals Are People is an amazing introductory philosophy text.
Animals Are People is a book recommendation.
It's a novel.
It's Peter's
I wrote
book
a couple of years back, I do actually think it's actually got a lot more information architecture in it than people might assume based on the title, which actually makes a categorical claim, right? That animals belong in the category of people.
Yeah, super cool. Samantha or Lou,
As we're wrapping up on time.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay. Well, thanks to. All right. This is our first pancake. Thank you so much to our first panel of guests. A note for the audience, by attending this session, I believe you've automatically RSVP'd for the future ones. Hope you can join us, but if not, we will be releasing them on YouTube or whatever. Thanking our panelists. Thanks to Kevin for technical support. Thanks to Mike Creech, our production specialist. Thanks to Abby Covert, founder of the Sensemakers Club, for connecting this team and us with the guests and everything. And thanks to the audience for watching. Happy Friday, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us today.